On today's downloadable content, we discuss a controversy that's been in the making for at least 2 decades, that of violent video games. It began with games like Doom and Mortal Kombat back in the early 90s, and as technologies evolved and improved, so has the medium. In doing so, incorporating more and more levels of blood, guts, and gore to the point where games like Mortal Kombat seem tame and childlike. As the realism increases, so do attempts to legislate video games, legislation geared toward protecting children. Attempts to legislate violent games have failed virtually everywhere such legislation has been proposed, but finally the issue heads to the Supreme Court. What effect could their ruling have on the industry? Listen into our discussion on this judicial episode of Downloadable Content. One and all, to episode 3 of this very fine, sophisticated program, Downloadable Content. We're joined by the same panel. We have Ron.
Evening, folks.
Peter.
Not dead yet. Getting better.
And our resident elf, Erica.
Hello.
How are we doing this fine evening?
It's okay.
Not dead yet.
Not dead yet, no, you'll be stone dead in a moment.
Monty Python.
But yes, as I've mentioned, we are talking about legislation, more specifically the California legislation, which has now gone to the Supreme Court, but, we'll be talking about other legislation and, the controversy, quote, controversy of violent video games and how they're turning the youth of America into corrupt serial killers.
Like they weren't already?
Oh, yes, because, it's not I don't think it's the video games. I think it's the Kellogg's advertising.
That damn frog and that damn bird.
I know, snap, crackle, and pop. What the hell are they thinking?
Well, all that sugar makes them real hyper.
What about Tricks, which teaches children not to share?
Lucky Charms as well. That gotta be racist to Irish people.
Not only racist, but teaches them that it's good to steal.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, come on. I mean, what the heck does a fatality have to do with corrupting our youth? But in all seriousness, every so often we hear about an incident. Some kid goes on a rampage in a school, goes berserk, and all you have to do now is pretty much count the seconds before somebody gets on their soapbox and says, oh, it's because they were playing Grand Theft Auto, or because they played Counter-Strike. It turned them into killers, and yeah.
Usually it's more than 1 in less than 2 seconds.
Very, very well put, Ron. And the thing is that I did a research paper on this, and basically the research says, and even from critics of video games, the research says that's bunk. Games do not turn children into killers. What the research does say is that the long-term effects are, at this point, undocumented. We don't know. There's no conclusive evidence. What it also says is that in children who are predisposed to violence, it can raise aggression levels, and that may lead to some violent behavior. But for other children who are not predisposed to violence,
meaning the majority of them,
there's no effect. And for some, and I consider myself among this number, it's smaller, but we do exist. For some of us, it's actually cathartic. It actually lowers aggression levels. And I gotta tell you, there are days when you come home from the office and nothing in the world feels better than dropping 5 rockets at the feet of an opponent and just watching them get blown off an asteroid. That just feels great. And you didn't hurt anybody, you just blew some pixels to dust.
Well, again, I mean, you know, I've done research on this subject too, and for every study that says video games and violence in children, there's no correlation, there's an equal and opposing study right behind it. So, you know, where, you know, in between all this mix of data and sources and, you know, research, you know, how much of it is actually verifiable? How much of it is based on solely scientific evidence instead of, you know...
personal bias.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
You know, hopefully... I mean, here's some facts. Let's begin the debate right now. We have, you know, established in 1994, we have the Entertainment Software Rating Board. And as such, we have a rating system, a standardized rating system that's been in place since then.
1994. That's been a long time, folks.
Yep.
1994. There, you know, because I mean, as we remember, each major gaming company had its own rating system. I remember seeing, you know, Sega's own rating system on the Genesis games, until finally in 1994, as a result of games like Doom, Mortal Kombat, because of the parental outcry, the gaming industry said, okay, we're going to create a standard, and that standard has been in place for, you know, almost 20 years. On every single commercially available video game, there is a rating on the front of the box, and on the back of the box, it tells you why the game got said rating. It's no different than, say, purchasing a movie. You see the movie rating, and you see why it got that rating. You know, it's, you know, rated R for, you know, nudity or strong sexual content. The gaming rating system is no different. The ESRB system, for those of you who are, you know, listening to this overseas, the ESRB is an American standardized system.
Other countries have their own standards as well.
Right. But for the sake of this argument, we're going to be talking about the American rating system, the ESRB system.
Especially since this involves American law.
I just looked it up. There's currently 7 rankings for the ESRB. You have early childhood, which is your basic, like, people age, like, from, like, toddler to, like, the age of 4 or 5. You have your generic everyone, which is just everyone can play it, and which they say is, like, ages 6 through 10. You have everyone 10 and up, which is...
That's a recent addition. It used
that's
to be,
recent.
Yeah, that was a recent addition.
Yeah. You have teen, which is like your 13 through 16s. You have mature, which is 17 and up, and then you have the adults only.
Right. You have. You know, to compare it to the American movie rating system, you know, you have your early childhood and your E-rated games, which is kind of your rated G.
Yeah.
You know, then you have your E10 plus and your teen-rated games, which is your PG, PG-13, and your M-rated games, mature-rated games, which is your rated R. So you can easily draw parallels between the movie rating system and the ESRB system, but the question is, and this I find very, very odd, because the movie rating system, everyone in the country knows the movie rating system. Everyone knows what they stand for. Everyone knows what's, you know, when you get a movie rating, what sort of stuff the movie will has. But why has the ESRB system fallen so far under the radar? I mean, we still have parents who, you know, I'm going to relate a little bit of personal experience here. I used to work at Walmart. You know, I used to work in the electronics section, and, you know, parents would, you know, we were thinking about buying, you know, Grand Theft Auto for their 10-year-old. Now, the kid's not stupid. The kid has seen Grand Theft Auto, knows what's in it. You know, the kid sees explosions and stealing cars, you know, all the things that little boys want to do when they're 10.
And when you're 15, and when you're 20, and when you're 35.
Exactly. But, you know, anytime that, you know, would happen, I would, you know, just talk to the parent briefly about the rating system. And I was shocked by the number of parents who had asked me, "Is this new?" You know, this, you know, and now when I worked at Walmart, we're talking 2005, 2006.
The thing is, this is not new, and the game industry has spent a lot of money to try and educate the public this does exist. I've seen advertisements on TVs, in stores, pamphlets available. All you just pick one up.
I agree with you. I mean, at the end of every game trailer you see on TV or on the internet.
Sometimes before the trailer even begins, they'll say like E10 and up or teen or mature.
Yeah, rated T for teen, just like in a movie, a movie commercial. So why has the ESRB rating system? Why is it so unknown? For a system that's been around 16, 17 years, you know, why is this still, you know, why do many people who are non-gamers, you know, parents, which is what the rating system was originally geared for, why is this so under the radar?
I think part of your problem, Brian, is that it's not that I mean, it is unknown, obviously, through your experience, but it's not that that the information isn't out there. It's that people aren't paying attention. It's that games are still, by and large, culturally looked at as something for children. So why would you bother to look? Games are for kids. Therefore, all games are for kids, which is complete and utter bunk. We all know that. Those of us, well, at least those four of us sitting around the mics right now, all know that. But in the general eye of the public, video games are still kids' toys.
We also have a situation, at least in my experience, where if you're not a gamer, the general attitude is, oh, it's a video game, I don't care.
There's that, too.
And this is from my perspective. Like, I know, like, the movie rating system was put in place during, like, I think it was the mid-40s because of something similar to what the current issue is with video games. People were seeing it as, this is violent, this is going to affect children's minds, we should limit it or rate it as best we can. And that's when the movie rating system got put into place. And now, 50 years later, people see movies as a art form. And I think it's just that culture shock right now of, is video game an art form, or is this entertainment, or is it both?
I think it's both. And also a scientific pursuit when you think about the engineering involved.
That's very true. It just surprises me that, you know, the ESRB system was created out of parents crying foul with games like Mortal Kombat and Doom. We have it. All the information is out there. You could research any video game, you know, go on the ESRB website, and you could pull up anything. But yet, this system, which has been around for the better part of 2 decades, is still considered, you know, fresh and new. And when did this start? And it's just interesting.
It is. And sad, too.
It is. I mean, which then leads to what we have now. Anytime anybody goes berserk in, you know, say, you know, some deranged, unhinged kid goes on a shooting rampage. Now, you know, you could, within the hour, you'll have, you know, quote, experts and politicians, you know, on news outlets, you know, decrying how Grand Theft Auto was, you know, involved. And then, you know, then politicians, in a knee-jerk reaction, try to pass legislation to regulate violent video games. without knowing all of the facts. I mean, yes, one of the things that video game legislation has in common is that they want a tougher enforcement of the ESRB rating system, or better yet, a complete overhaul of the system. I don't think that is necessary, because I think the rating system is fine. It's people who don't want to take the time to educate themselves.
Everything's in place for parents to basically review the games and know what's right and not right for their children. Parents know the children better than anyone else, and everything's in place so that parents can make the final decision, as it should be. But parents are not doing what is necessary, and then start crying foul when they all of a sudden get surprised on something that has really never been hidden.
And in doing so, what we have now is a sense of parents asking the government to raise their children. This is what we have. Anytime any legislation gets proposed, that's exactly what it is. Parents want the government to, take care of the kids, and as a result, government passes legislation, or tries to, which then puts the responsibility on the shoulders of GameStop clerks and store associates.
People who might work for a MIC wage.
Now you're asking those people to, raise and supervise what, children that are not theirs, what they can and can't play. The fact of the matter is that many giant video game retailers like GameStop, EB, Walmart, already have existing policies in place for mature-rated video games.
So in other words, they're voluntarily regulating what games they will sell to minors.
Basically, I have had to go in and with my brother to say this is he's not even 16 yet, so he can't really by himself buy an M-rated game. I had to go in and approve that this is a responsible person and I'm a responsible adult that's going to monitor his gameplay in some fashion.
Right. I mean, as we've mentioned, many of the big video game outlets already have policies in place voluntarily enforcing if you try to go buy an M-rated game, and you look under 17, you're gonna get carded.
That's in another thing you were talking about a little bit ago, Brian, that parents kind of want the government to raise their children. Another thing that I have found is that, and that my research into the topic showed, was that of the parents that actually buy their children's video games, almost none of them will ever stop and sit and watch the game. They don't get up in arms about it until they happen to be walking by the living room and hear the explosion and look at the game and go, "Oh my God!"
Or as like a string of cuss words gets set off across the screen by some voice actor.
Exactly.
Then they go back to the store and then yell at the clerk.
Right.
Yeah.
But the problem is that, unfortunately, certain media outlets, TV is a big one, the parents seem to kind of want the TV and the games to kind of play babysitter to their children while they're off, doing housework, getting dinner, whatever, taking care of their stuff, and they want the game to be a babysitter to their kid, and they're not understanding or even really caring until that string of cuss words that oh my gosh, I just saw my kid shank somebody in this game. They're not paying attention to it until that particular moment, and then they get all up in arms about it. So it's really a huge problem that the parents are not taking an interest and getting involved with their children, and that's let alone their children's hobbies. So there's a huge problem there.
Yep. And that's what happens. It's, as soon as, the parent doesn't pay attention until they come across something that on screen, or they hear something from the game, and then, get all uppity about it, and, panic ensues.
Hmm.
It doesn't help that whenever, again, a student goes ape, people suddenly get on their soapbox, mainly Jack Thompson.
Who's no longer a lawyer, I want to point that out. He's no longer a lawyer.
I am so glad Florida disbarred him, because, really, he didn't know what he was doing.
It's telling that he was disbarred.
It is, and now we're gonna want to shift now more toward legal ramifications. Anytime we an incident like, for example, we're so quick to pin the blame on video games that sometimes the reports turn out to be false. We all remember the tragic incident at Virginia Tech in 2007.
Yeah.
And if you remember, very quickly after that, there were reports that the student who was the murderer was an avid Counter-Strike player. It was only later on during the police investigation that they discovered that his friends and his roommates had never seen him play any video games. He didn't have any in his possession.
What he did have was a psychological condition for which he was being medicated, and as I understood it, I can't remember now because it was a few years ago, but he either had not been taking his meds or there had been some muck-up with the dosage.
I think he stopped taking his meds.
Yeah, that sounds more accurate.
Whatever the case, a lot of these publicized incidents are the result of not video games, but because the person or persons were already unhinged to begin with. They were having a bad life, or, whether it was psychologically or physically, maybe they were having a bad home life, depression, whatever. And that tends to be the case with most of these cases. Unfortunately, you do have a few, outstanding, incidents. For example, I'll give you a few here. Another incident in 2007. A Russian man was beaten to death over an argument in the MMORPG Lineage 2. The man was killed when his guild and a rival one challenged each other to a real-life brawl. And then we have this one, which happened just a few months ago. I remember reading about this one. There was an incident in Florida where a 22-year-old mother killed her baby because he wouldn't stop crying while she was playing Farmville.
Farmville?
Yeah.
Yeah, on Facebook.
Oy.
So, but with all of these, and there are lists of published reports. We tend to see that it's the person who perpetrates the act is not all that right to begin with.
I was just gonna say, can you honestly, reasonably blame the game?
Can people not take responsibility for themselves?
Exactly.
Well, it's because of these published incidents that legislation gets passed in various states. California being the most notable because that's now the case that has gone to the Supreme Court. Other states have passed legislation to regulate and, outright ban the sale of video games to minors, which end up getting shot down or overturned by the courts, almost always on First Amendment grounds.
Mm.
That's because games have really evolved into a form of expression. I don't know a single game that doesn't have some kind of narrative, story, or even a concept or philosophy to convey. So, this is a First Amendment expression issue. It is protected free speech. There is artistic merit involved. That's why these laws have been shot down by the federal circuit courts, time and again.
So, we finally moved to California, in which they had a law which was passed and signed into law by the governor.
Former governor.
The former governor, yes, former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, which never actually went into effect, because right after the law went into effect, an injunction was issued, and the courts in California had found the law unconstitutional, so it never, ever went into effect. Now it has gone all the way to the Supreme Court. Finally.
For anyone listening overseas, that's the highest court in the United States.
Yes. The case is called Schwarzenegger versus EMA, the Entertainment Merchants Association. The law basically restricts the sale or rental of violent video games to people under 18 and requires that such titles show a 2x2-inch 18 sticker on their front covers. But from what I read of the law, it's pretty vague. It's pretty vague on what the state considers violent.
It is vague. I actually read the transcript for the oral arguments given to the Supreme Court, and I have to say that the counsel for the state of California could not clearly define his standard.
Well, let's start talking about the specifics of the law itself. According to California, this law basically criminalizes the sale of, quote, defiantly violent video games to minors. Well, what the heck is defiantly violent?
Deviantly violent?
Thank you. I knew I was tongue twisting, uselessly there.
Well, as I understand it, the council was trying to address that there were some games that were so horrendously violent that involved maiming of human beings and just absolute grotesque violence. But he could not differentiate where the line was to draw without using subjective adjectives. He could not give a clear description to the court. So, even one of the justices had to ask, well, what is this in relation to, say, maybe Grimm's fairy tales?
Because some of those are kind of gruesome.
Some. Most of them are.
Yeah.
My parents read me the toned down versions. I didn't come across the originals until I was much older.
Ah, yes, the nicely polished, cleaned up versions.
Yes.
The state of California is also trying to pattern the law parallel to how the sale of girly magazines is restricted as well.
Right. One of the arguments for the state of California, California argued that this video game law was constitutional based on a previous Supreme Court ruling, which was in 1968, Ginsburg versus New York, which says that a state can restrict material from minors even if it is not objectionable to adults. But still, why video games? Why is this law, going solely after video games? I mean, you could argue, deviantly violent things in books, movies, music.
TV
it's
shows.
A very good question, and the counsel for the Electronics Merchants Association made a point that when there was something new and shocking had come in the form of entertainment or media, even as far back as the 19th century murder mysteries, that all of a sudden there was a big objection to this material. It happened again in the 50s with comic books. It happened again with movies. It just seems like as our artistic mediums, entertainment mediums keep progressing with technology, there is a new objection. But there isn't a really solid ground for the objection. As you can see, comic books, movies, murder mystery novels are protected by the First Amendment.
Yes, but my question is, why the push to regulate solely video games and not other forms of media which display graphic depictions of violence and sex?
I think it's two
But
parts. I think
We'll go
the
with Ron
first
first.
part is the money involved. Video game is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Studios rise and fall in success of one or video game. Mass Effect or StarCraft 2, for example, made Blizzard hundreds of millions of dollars, and the game took 10 years to get made. Uh, and I think it's one issue is the I don't want to say the right activists, but the more conservative folk want to get their finger in the pie and have a little bit for themselves.
Okay.
I think the second part is that it's basically what back to you said, Brian. It's an issue of parents raising or not raising their children. And it's almost a failure on society's part as it is today of how parents don't want to or raise their kids because I think they don't feel they are capable of raising their kids. Well, I don't know of anyone who I would call ready to raise a kid. I think this just got to be learned from experience.
I agree. Erica, you were starting to say something.
The other thing is that some of the arguments I read about it were that, like it or lump it, one of the things that does set video games apart from other media is the interactivity of them. There is an immersion factor there that just simply is, at least in any well-designed game, there is an immersion factor there that doesn't really exist in other media. At least I mean, I can get tied up in a good book and be completely a million miles away, but it's a different feeling entirely than when I'm totally immersed in a game. I can if I'm in a game that I like, I can be in that world forever. Before I realize that, oh, hey, I have other things that I need to do, or, I mean, I can pull myself away if I know that I've got other stuff that needs to do, but it's a totally different experience because it is so much more interactive.
Well, the same could be said for a book. Are you not interacting with a novel?
Yeah, but it's different, and I do. Words are failing me right now, and for that I apologize. But like I said, it is different for me.
The interaction with the book is you turn a page. The interaction with the video game is you're pushing buttons, and the game reacts to your choices and creates a new event for you to see.
Exactly.
It would be, say, for example, Mass Effect 2. There's parts in Mass Effect 2 where you have the option of choosing a quote-unquote good or a quote-unquote evil act. And the story changes based on what you chose to do.
Fair enough.
And it's getting more interactive when you've got now things like the Wii and the PlayStation Move and the Xbox 360 Kinect. Now you're really getting into it. So it is a little different than other forms of media, but does that necessarily mean that they should fall under different legislation? I don't think so. I just think people need to take a pill and relax and just get comfortable with the idea. It's just another reason to have a knee-jerk reaction. It's not necessarily a good one.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think we're all bringing up some very, very good points. Just I'll touch up on a couple of other things before we cut to break. Um, after reading the text of the California of the law, I mean, it's way too vague in my opinion, because again, what is deviantly violent? What do you consider a deviantly violent video game as opposed to a normal violent video game?
This was addressed when I was reading the transcript for oral arguments. The justices did approach us. What is the difference? And the counsel for the EMA noted that the FCC was charged by Congress to do something similar for television, and they failed.
They
sent the job right back to Congress and says, nope, we can't do it.
You can't do it. I mean, yes, the FCC created the television rating system that you see now on every television show before it starts. And, parents can put, we have that whole V-chip thing, and parents can impose parental controls on, televisions and VCR. Yeah, I'm dating myself. Blu-ray players and DVD players, but, I mean, let's face it, the younger generation can bypass parental controls in about 4 seconds. So, and with more and more violence and sex on TV, if you want to really protect your children from that sort of stuff, they're going to have a very sheltered life. But I mean, where do you draw the line? I mean, the FCC tries but fails miserably. And you cannot put the entire group of people 18 and under one brush. There's different maturity levels.
Yes, the law does exactly that. 18 and under is a complete class.
It does not account at all for maturity levels. I was playing Mortal Kombat at 10 years old. As an example, I didn't see myself, becoming a sociopath. I don't get it, but we will continue this discussion. We will get to the different lines of questioning that the justices hurled at each side, and then we'll talk about, what potential rulings could have for the industry. So, some good debate going on. You're going to want to keep listening. We continue with this debate on the second half of downloadable content. Of this very interesting downloadable content. We're talking the California video game law and its case now in the Supreme Court of the United States. We have brought forth some viewpoints, talking about how vague this law is, But the fact of the matter is that it has gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and the fact that the Supreme Court accepted the case is telling, because maybe they want to put this to rest once and for all, and I'm hoping it does. I am really hoping it does, but we'll get to that. For now, though, we're going to shift to the different lines of questioning that was presented at the trial. During the oral arguments. Both sides got grilled. It wasn't it wasn't easy for either side. But we will start with very early on when the justices were questioning the counsel for the state of California, and I mentioned this in the first half. They're trying to establish what the law is, and California wants to restrict the sale or rental of games it considers deviantly violent. Again, how do you describe that? Are there differing degrees of violence? You tell me. It's,
Well, in a common sense argument, you could probably say that there is a difference between, say, slapstick violence like the Three Stooges or Bugs Bunny versus something where, where blood's actually drawn. But at the same time, if we were to take the violence portrayed in, say, the Three Stooges or Bugs Bunny at face value, blood would normally be drawn anyways.
I mean, it's, why, when the counsel for California was asked, how do you define this type of violence, the counsel replied that there were established social norms, which led to the justices asking why video games, solely video games, should be singled out and restricted. Because by that logic, that means anytime, an offending media, showed up, be it a movie or a book, is California going to move to restrict the sale of those?
Well, it's a compelling question.
We've already seen the failure of the FCC to regulate violence on television. It doesn't work. I mean, you cannot have the government imposing blanket legislation over an entire population. It's because, you cannot, at least in a free democratic society, you cannot tell parents how to raise their kid. Because the parent is going to turn right around and say, well, screw you.
And it's extraordinarily subjective that's the other reason that blanket policy doesn't work, is you're trying to cram so many shades of gray into a black and white thing, and you cannot do that. It just doesn't work.
Ron, what say you?
I think the argument is, I think the basic thing is the violent, vagrant deviance is, violent act is more of a subjective thing than it is an objective thing. I think it's based on one person's opinion. For example, I think Bugs Bunny style comedy is funny but not violent. However, someone else may look at that and say, well, that's violent. And it's just at varying levels of degrees of where someone thinks something is violent to where something is slapstick. And I think that's one of the things that that the justices were trying to reference was, well, where does slapstick end and violence begin?
Right, how do you regulate that? And which is what the justices were asking the counsel for California. We get to the absurd here as we get toward the end of the arguments, one of the justices asked the counsel this question. I'm quoting right from the transcript. Would a video game that portrayed a Vulcan as opposed to a human being maimed and tortured, would that be covered by this act? To which the counsel for California said no, it wouldn't, because this law is only directed toward the range of options that are able to be inflicted on a human being. So
last time I checked, Vulcans look pretty damn human-like.
Yes, they are humanoid. Yes, if you discount the green blood and the pointy ears and
angled eyebrows.
Yeah, that. So even here, we see that the law, this law in California, is extremely dicey because what if you have a violent video game in which you perform, you kill beings that aren't even human, aliens.
Doesn't even have to be aliens. You can pick a Tolkien-esque world where they're elves and dwarves.
Precisely. How do you regulate that? Objectively, I don't think it can be regulated. And I do recall from the transcript that the justice made a point that this is a law, this is criminal law that was trying to be enacted, which means that the law cannot be vague. It has to be very clear. And yet we keep looking at this, what is the standard, and we cannot find what the standard is. That alone should be enough to have, that alone is a compelling reason why this should never be law.
In law, as much as we privately complain about law and how we think it's biased or something like that, law is very black and white. There is no room for gray. And when it comes to, I think, the video game, there's a wide variety of gray in there.
There's a tremendous amount of gray because of the expressive nature of the medium.
Yeah, I mean, just by itself, I think the reason why this won't get passed is based on the ESRB's current rating of what is a teen-rated game. Because there's stuff in teen-rated games that I think would be violent, but there's also stuff in teen-rated games that is slapstick comedy. And it's just based on that right then and there that makes me think this law, without some very, very precise wording, will not get passed.
Even still, the counsel for California even told the justices that the state standard doesn't even involve the ESRB ratings, and that you could have M-rated games that would fall under the review law and M-rated games that don't.
Yeah.
So, what we're seeing here is some very dicey legal language. That's, you're asking basically to create a special type of prohibition, is what I'm gleaning from this.
It is a request. I mean, the counsel for the EMA did point out this is very much like the government requesting an exception to the First Amendment protection of free expression.
Although, it admittedly also, I mean, the counsel for the video game industry, was also, not immune to the line of questioning, because a lot of the defense for the video game industry, there was a very heavy reliance on the First Amendment. For example, and I'm looking at the Game Informer article here. Again, the crux of EMA attorney Paul Smith's argument relied on the First Amendment, but that didn't mean he was free from the court's scrutiny. At one point in the proceedings, after Chief Justice John Roberts shot down Smith's assertion that parental controls on consoles and TVs were adequate, several justices cornered Smith with heavy reliance on the First Amendment and the assertion that there more or less wasn't a problem with minors getting their hands on violent video games. The counsel for the video game industry basically asserted that there's really, nothing that a state can do to regulate this sort of stuff because we already have an established rating system.
it actually was more deeper than that. He did make that point. He did have those questions. He also pointed out that because we have the rating system, because the industry is voluntarily policing itself, that not only is the state doesn't really have any means to, it doesn't have an interest to either. In other words...
Yeah, elaborate that. Try to break it down into simpleton English.
Well, basically, he's saying that the state really needs to butt out because if one of the state's concerns is that parents do not have the power to raise their own kids as they see fit, and this law will help them. The counsel for the EMA said no. We have a system in place now where parents can see the rating on games that has already been rated by an independent board, that retailers already are voluntarily, they won't sell certain games to minors that are M-rated, and they also point out that 90% of games purchased from minors are by parents already. So the parents are already involved as soon, in almost every case, before the child even has a chance to play it.
I think that statistic is a little high. I don't think parents, make up 90% of all video game sales.
And the majority of retailers are restricting the sale of M-rated games to minors voluntarily. It does help push that statistic up, though.
Yes. That is true. I just think 90% is a little high.
Well, in order to be sure, we'd have to see the actual study on that.
Correct.
Fortunately, none of us have that available.
I also remember reading in another video game magazine, this must have been about a year ago, maybe two, where they actually interviewed someone who was part of one of the ESRB rating boards. What did they determine the game to be M or teen, and they broke down people, they brought in closed subject testing of all age groups, of all genders, of all backgrounds, parents, single college kids, elderly people who also play video games, and had them sit down and watch a playthrough of a video game and fill out a cue card saying, well, on a scale of 1 to 5, how violent was it? How peaceful was it? How offensive did you find this? And it was a long questionnaire. So I mean, this isn't the ACRB isn't just slapping on a number. They're going through and rating every game as effectively as they can.
That's also true to some extent. I mean, to try to judge the constitutionality of this particular law. Again, this has to be something that's clearly defined. I mean, if you're gonna, how do you judge what's good for, in this case, the California law wants, to restrict they want a system to be totally separate from the established ESRB system. Well, how do you judge content that is suitable for a 16-year-old and not a 17-year-old?
That question was brought up by the justices.
I mean, yes, there's already regulation, in other areas of life, say the death penalty. You can't be tried. You can't get be tried for it if you're younger than 18. Things like that. But that's clearly cut and dry.
The other things too is minors can't buy alcohol or can't buy tobacco, but these are not issues of expression, so they really don't apply when in a debate like this either.
Yeah, those are more issues of health, and even then,
there's actually established research that shows the harm involved.
Yeah,
you don't have the clear-cut established research of harm among video games yet, or if we ever will. And this has been studied for a long time.
So, it has been studied for a long time, and again, I know that, there's a lot of, while the counsel for the game industry, heavily relies on the First Amendment, there are also other arguments that can be made. Again, how do you enforce such a law? For that to happen, if this law were to go into effect, I guess we're now going to move into what could happen. If the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the state of California, I would think, I see, something, you would then have to set up some sort of, regulatory oversight board, independent.
Another three-letter organization.
Yeah, independent from the ESRB. Now, just so we're all on the same page, the ESRB already evaluates and reviews every single game before it is made commercially available. Just like in the movie industry. You're asking then California would have to create some sort of independent oversight agency separate from the ESRB to create a standard of what a 16-year-old can see, what a 17-year-old can see, what an 18-year-old can see. And then, on top of that, then game developers would have to, establish new procedures and policies, developers as well, so that they could sell their games in California. It becomes a big legislative mess.
There are other issues also, because this is a criminal law that will impact retailers.
Right, because now you're putting all of the emphasis, all of the responsibility. You just took the responsibility completely away from the parent and put it squarely on the shoulders of retail clerks.
Yes, and those retail clerks, they work for minimum wage, if maybe a little bit more. And now they're put in a position where if they make one mistake, they can go to prison.
They can go to either prison or pay really, really hefty fines.
Well, the minimum was like $1,000 fine, I think.
Yeah, it's the kind of fine that a person working that kind of job would not be able to pay.
And probably lose their job over.
Oh, sure, they lose their job because it could be forced to terminate them. They won't be able to report for work while they're in prison.
No, and it wouldn't be it potentially wouldn't be the retail associate who gets hit with the penalties. It could also be the store, the chain itself.
Over what could be a minor mistake. Maybe the child walked in with a false ID.
Yeah, and it's human nature. It's worth mentioning. Human nature. If you make something illegal and somebody wants it badly enough, they're gonna find a way to get it.
In case of point,
Drugs.
the alcohol in the 1920s.
Yeah,
I mean that basically was the birth of the mafia and the mobs in America.
Yeah, and also, how exactly do you prevent...
Hi, Erica.
I've been kind of holding off here for a little bit, but that's great to be able to restrict it via retail chain. That entails enough complication in itself, but you can buy anything on Amazon or eBay. How do you restrict that?
That also is very true. I mean, if the Supreme Court ruled in favor of California, that opens the floodgates.
It really does.
It also creates a slippery slope problem where, as was noted, why are video games solely being targeted? Then this actually gets passed. Then what's to stop this law from being expanded into other forms of media? What's to stop the lines from being redrawn that maybe we should ban M-rated games altogether, when in fact several of them do have a lot of artistic merit?
That's very, very true. I mean, and again, as Erica just brought up, okay, now you go to the internet,
Sure. Most of those retailers you can buy from don't even have an office in California, therefore they wouldn't be subject to the law. And next thing you know, you find out that it's just your law is circumvented.
But I mean, it's a similar idea. I mean, if you suddenly, ban the sale of video games, of M-rated video games, people are going to find ways to get around it. It's the same useless, the United States government war on drugs, which has been, there's been trillions of dollars of failure. Because, if people want it that badly enough, they're going to find a way to get it. End of story. And it would severely, not just, a legal impact, but also, a financial impact. You really handcuff game developers.
Game developers are very highly trained engineers and artists. They are not just your Joe Blow you're going to find in a factory. They have college educations, and many of them have very advanced college educations. And then you're going to put these people out of a job when all they're trying to do is create something that actually could have, and most often actually, does have artistic and scientific merit.
More specifically, video game companies and developers are businesses. They're out to make money.
They're part of the economy, folks.
I see nothing but bad things if the Supreme Court, decides to make a special exception to the First Amendment, with regard to this specific medium.
Go ahead.
So now let's take a look at the other side. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of the video game industry and says that the California law is unconstitutional.
It will be pretty much in upkeeping with what the lower federal courts have pretty much said for years.
Ron, it's been a few minutes since I've heard your voice. What do you think?
I think the issue. I think if the Supreme Court rules in favor of the video game organization, I think it's going to be a no. But I think if the people who want to pass this law word it better and can give examples and give objective definitions of what is violent and what isn't, I think then that is going to be the bigger issue, is if they still make it unconstitutional then.
You basically stole the thought right out of my head. I mean, I believe that the Supreme Court will find this law unconstitutional and shoot it down once and for all. After reading everything about it, reading the transcripts, reading all of the stuff about it, I firmly believe that the California law is simply way too vague.
Yeah.
But and I agree with what you said just a minute ago, and even the Game Informer article mentions this. The Supreme Court's decision could encourage future laws to be more effectively written so that they may succeed.
Yeah, but then the issue is going to be, what if future laws get passed, and say, for example, Virginia passes a better written and easier, the lines are more clearly drawn in there, but what if the Supreme Court knocks it down then? Now there's going to be the issue of, well, does this mean video games are art? Does this mean we need to start putting video games in the Library of Congress?
That would be cool.
That would be cool, but I mean, it's going to be, I think it's just going to be delaying the eventual question of, are video games art? And if so, that means art's being protected by the First Amendment because it's an expression of an idea or an expression of free speech. And therefore, that's going to make video games constitutional.
I agree. And as I said, I don't think the Supreme Court is going to rule in favor of California. But again, we've seen it happen historically where they'll rule against a law. They'll say, this law is unconstitutional, but, if you reword, if you get more specific, then, things might change. I mean, we see it with, we see it already in United States history with the Supreme Court cases like Roe versus Wade. and also, the recent, change to the Miranda rights. And now corporations count as people, and that they can, influence elections. So it can be chipped away at.
Yes. It certainly, even a Supreme Court decision probably won't end this debate once and for all. It'll probably just allow... There will be other ways. The debate will continue like how these other ones already have. But the one thing that you notice is that the Supreme Court will try and compel the laws to be more strictly defined, more definitive. But we've already discussed, how do we do that?
I'm not saying it'd be easy. I'm just saying it's just giving them the option to do so. It may take another 5-10 years before someone comes up with a sneakily worded way of having it appear black and white.
And
I think given enough time, someone could word it that way. And that's going to be the next big issue. Will be that future law.
Yeah. So basically, I think we're all in agreement that we don't think that... are we all in agreement that we don't think that the Supreme Court is going to rule in favor of California?
I'm actually not sure which way they're going to rule. I'd like to see them rule against California. And there certainly is a lot of compelling reason why they should rule against California.
Well, every gamer wants to see every gamer who's paying attention to this case wants them to rule against California.
Oh, sure, but I'm just saying, not just as a gamer, but also looking at the arguments that have been made, there is plenty of compelling reason why this should not be allowed.
Yes, the Supreme Court decision is gonna have some weight.
Gonna have a lot of weight, not just some.
But, I don't think it's going to end the debate once and for all. I want to see more people be educated on the ESRB rating system, because that's a big part of this. We've had this established rating system, and it needs to be better known. So,
parents need to start paying attention. The ESRB has been shouting from the rooftop, smoke signals, car alarms. They've done everything they can to get attention. Hey, this exists. And why do people still not know about it? The only reason you can come up with is they're not paying attention.
And there you have it. We've come full circle. So, on our next show, episode 4, we're going to discuss underrated video games. We're going to discuss video games that were critically acclaimed left and right, but fell so far below the radar and really deserve a spotlight. If you have feedback and want to weigh in on this discussion about the Supreme Court case, you can do it right on anywhere I post this, quite frankly. Facebook, LiveJournal, The Battling Arena, at charbattle.proboards.com. Feel free to weigh in, and again, if anyone listening want to take part in recording a future episode, drop me a line. But in the meantime, I thank Ron, Peter, and Erica for their wonderful contributions to this debate. And on that note, we bid you adieu. See you in 2 weeks. Say goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Yeah, Ryan.
Ow.
God, hit him.
I got it.
Hurt him.
Beat him with sticks. Good night, all.